Laura, some people call you a psychic. You call yourself an intuit. Nicole Kidman says you defy explanation. How exactly do your abilities work?
Well, first of all, everyone has some version of my abilities. My abilities work because my brain doesn't work for much else. So it's not all that enviable. But when I'm given a focus, it's almost like a pig pen. All of this information just comes in around me. And then I've learned to report it. And it's as simple as that. It's information I've never been exposed to before. So that differs from the Jungian explanation for intuition, which is, that which is stored in the collective unconscious. It certainly differs from memory or imagination. It's fresh information, and we all do this all the time.
So can anyone channel their intuition and focus in the way that you do?
Yes. I have a super skill because my brain is very ADHD and very not present in other ways. So, for example, my memory is very damaged. I have very mobile attention. But everybody can get enough intuition to enhance their life, their relationship, their business. And of course, intuition has a double edge because it also, once you realize how porous we are, we absorb people's negative feelings, even from a distance. We have telepathic dialogues, which are often not too helpful to our actual relationships because we don't realize we're being on some level heard. So mastering intuition is really important for success.
When did you realize you had a bit of a super skill or the ability to master it in a way that others don't?
I was in my very early 20s, because I'm a math and science nerd. So in my very early 20s, I saw a TV show on one of these nerd channels that nobody watches except for math and science nerds on experiments that were being done in extrasensory perception. And I thought, well, doesn't everyone do this? Because, when you're 20, you think everyone's thinks exactly the way you do, but you're the only one who gets a pimple. And so I called them up and I said, I can do what you're doing. And I went in, and the doctor writes about this in the first book, one of the researchers. He started explaining, and I said, just put a name in an envelope. And I'd never done this before. It just came to me intuitively. I held the envelope, and I basically described past, present, and future, which we later found out was correct, about a person. And so I became a magnet for people who wanted to study this ability of psychic skills, intuition, extrasensory perception, whatever you want to call it.
Wow. And you actually ended up quite soon after working for the police force, right? I mean, you were very young when you started helping them look for missing people.
So every intuitive back in the early 80s, I mean, every accurate intuitive, I'm not talking about the spacey ones who, talk to rocks, but every accurate intuitive ended up working for the police department. And there was one man who lived, I forget what his name was, he was fabulous. He lived in Riverdale, who made them give him a plaque every time a person was found. I didn't. I wasn't that savvy. But, I think that word gets around and people say, well, can you do this? And for me, I really learned how to use my skills by people, by companies, by police departments, by politicians, by drug research companies saying, well, can you do this? And I would say, well, I don't know, but I'd be happy to try. I was in my 20s. I didn't really have a pony in the race. I mean, nobody really, or very few people, I think, grow up wanting to be a weirdo. So I really learned through people asking, can you do this? And often I could, and sometimes I couldn't.
How many people did you help the police find?
Oh, I have no idea.
You didn't get the plaque, so you can't keep count.
I didn't get the plaque, and it wasn't that. Didn't make that big an impression on me. What did make a big impression is that intuition is you're very detached when you're getting the information. You're not feeling it. You can do it because of perspective, which is why people are not good intuitives for themselves, because they have no perspective. So what really left a lasting impression is the horrified faces on these kind of hardened men when I would be describing sometimes horrific scenes in a completely deadpan voice, because I was just kind of watching it from a distance and describing it, and they were looking at me like, wow, 666 must be somewhere on your body.
I mean, you had quite a lot of trauma early on in your life. Your mother and your brother and your sister and your uncle all died by suicide. How did you turn that trauma into something positive that you can work with?
Well, I think that our life, we don't really have a choice. I mean, you take what you're given, and it's really what the prism is about. You take what is because it is. I mean, no amount of beating your breast is going to make it different. If beating my breast would make it different, I would definitely beat my breast. But it doesn't. So you find the can do. And I was very lucky because one thing that a very porous brain like mine does, it doesn't help you memorize the multiplication tables or the periodic tables, but it does get you the information that you need when you need it. So really the information on the prism, which is kind of what is the mechanics of success, what are the mechanics of survival, was given to me very, very early. I just didn't understand it until I was much older. And then I put it down in a book because I really think what all of those suicides taught me was that people need to know the mechanics. We are sold a bill of goods where we have to do all these things and spend all this money and be so much better to survive. Nah, we're actually built to survive. Little changes have incredible results.
One of the things I find most fascinating about your work is that your day-to-day mostly comes from not celebrities, which we'll come on to, but long-standing contracts with Fortune 500 companies. Do people find it surprising that companies use your gut instinct instead of, I guess, more kind of corporate forecasting methods?
Well, I mean, my methods are corporate forecasting methods in the sense that the two of the companies I've worked with for 30 years. And I do forecast. I'm not wearing purple. I don't look into a crystal ball. I don't use ishy-gishy language. They give me a target, a question, and I tell them what I perceive. I don't give advice, and I actually don't give things like financial information to anyone but a financial company, so I don't overstep. And I think in my career, what's allowed me to work in the mainstream is I would never tell a civilian what was wrong with their body. I would tell their doctor. I don't overstep. I'm not trained to do a lot of things, but my brain does do things that traditional forecasting can't, which is those out of the blue things that nobody expects, that historically maybe have never happened, I can perceive. And that's my gift. On the flip side, one block from a house I've lived in for 33 years, 43 years, I'm completely lost.
Can you just give me a concrete example of the sort of thing that you say out of the blue you could perceive that others might not be able to?
Yes. I mean, I'm going to give you just to not, because I'm careful about not
Sensitive
sharing
information, of course.
But what I will do, because this has been well documented, was, and I forget when the credit crunch was, 2008 or 2009, I was tired. And so on a radio show, I predicted the stock market crash on an Irish radio show. And I was just tired and thought no one would listen to it. It was this cute little tiny Irish radio show. Well, I was wrong. So how did it come? I just woke up and I thought, oh, I don't want to own any stocks right now. And I called my broker, who later verified this on CNN. I called my broker and I said, sell everything. And she said, oh, no, the market's doing wonderfully and you've made 30% and blah, 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 and it's robust. And I said, it's just giving me agita. So great, I've made 30%, sell it all. And she did. And I told the companies I work for, this is what I've done. I would, again, never advise. I'm not qualified. This is what I've done. And then when a couple of weeks later the market crashed and nobody really expected it, all of a sudden I was, because I'd done it publicly, which I never do on Total Slip Up. But or they'll ask about the structure of a company, and what I try to do is do some past, some present, some future. So I'll say, oh, I think my sense is this company lost its CEO 4 months ago. I believe they've just hired a woman. I have a sense that they're doing another round of funding that they're planning for December. And this just comes in as these little kind of like fireflies, like these little data points. I have no idea what I'm talking about. They do. And that's the wonderful thing. And they document it. So I especially if I take on a new company, which I rarely do, I hear when I'm right, but for my other companies, I only hear when I'm wrong.
You wrote your first book in the mid-90s, and that brought you to the attention of quite a lot of Hollywood. Demi Moore credits you with her Oscar-nominated comeback recently in The Substance, and you've now been friends for about 35 years. She says your predictions are about 98 to 99% accurate. That's a pretty good hit rate.
I don't know what to say to that. And I would credit Demi with her. First of all, Demi, in the interim, wrote a New York Times best-selling memoir. She raised wonderful children. People say a comeback. She has never been fallow. She's always been right there doing things in the world, and a one-track life is a fine life, but that's not how she lives it.
A repositioning then, rather than a comeback. Laura, there will be people who will feel a little bit skeptical about making life choices, making changes, making decisions from a psychic. What would you say to those skeptics?
I would say keep your skepticism, because there's a lot of, I've been told you can't swear on radio. There's a lot of bulltookie out there, and skepticism is good. Intuition's not a belief. If you have to believe in something for it to work, your belief works. The tool doesn't. Intuition is a tool. That's why I've written 7 books where you are your own intuitive. And it is very important that your tools are reliable. So I would say skepticism is an important thing. However, one of my favorite quotes is the good scientist suspends disbelief and runs the experiment anyway, because what you may find is that an easily accessible tool that you have to dramatically change your life is right there for you to use, and always has been.